since that time I've worked in special education exclusively. I'd have to go back and retrain if I wanted to do anything else. Meeting the needs of children with disabilities in their educational setting, in their everyday life, through working with their families and their teachers, to me is a raison d'etre, it really is. But having said that, the other bit of me that has become addicted to learning is that in those early years in the job, I became quite defensive about the fact that I was working in education, because it seemed to me there was a feeling among physiotherapists that I met who didn't work in education that they didn't actually consider that this was real physio. And I think even to this day, if somebody comes to me and says, I've got this back problem, I said, look, I'm not a real physio, you go and talk to someone else. But there was certainly a feeling that back then, at the beginning of the 90s, that a functional approach to remediation and education for children with disabilities. Bobath was the catchword back then as well. Everybody wanted to know if you were Bobath trained. I hadn't done any Bobath. There was still, seemed to me, looking back, I think people still didn't believe that you could achieve good outcomes for kids if you didn't work one-to-one in a hands-on situation, that just going out and observing and looking at an environmental approach just wasn't going to cut the mustard as far as practice went. And for me, that led me to want to prove that you could. Having completed that advanced diploma, I decided I wanted to do some more postgraduate study. At that time, there wasn't anything else for physiotherapists at the beginning of the 90s. And Robin Groter was at the School of Physiotherapy, and she was saying, look, it's coming. Something's going to happen. We're going to have postgraduate study for physiotherapy. You know, hang in there. You need to keep upgrading your knowledge, and something's going to happen. So what I did at that time was Otago University runs a program called the Diploma for Graduates. It was then a 36-point course that allowed you to bridge, for example, if you'd done history and you wanted to go into economics and do a master's, you could do a 36-point equivalent of several papers using your basis of your one degree and move into a completely different subject. For me, my diploma of physiotherapy that I came with from the UK wasn't enough to get me into the University of Otago at that time to do any postgraduate work. So I did a diploma for graduates, and I did papers in statistics and biomedical ethics, and I did 2 papers at the School of Physical Education, one on motor learning, and then I did a research paper with them as well. That gave me enough points and set me up so that in 1993, 94, when they started the first intake of the postgraduate school of physiotherapy, started up at the University of Otago, I enrolled as one of the first students there to do my Master of Physiotherapy through that. And Peter Milburn came on board not long after, I think, as one of those first coordinators with Robin Groter, who was the head of that, as a postgraduate school. And then towards the end of the 2 years of my master's training, that was when the whole school of physiotherapy moved over to the university from the Polytech. I knew what I wanted to do for my thesis. I knew I wanted to write about the role of the physiotherapist in New Zealand special education. I wanted to justify what we did and how we did it, and to use the literature and the information that was available to provide a background there. And in doing that, I went back and did a very rudimentary examination of where physiotherapy had come from in New Zealand. I don't think I went back as far as maybe you have, David, but found out information about where the profession started, and then made the links through to the late 1940s when, as I mentioned earlier, Earl Carlson came out from the States and the whole movement for special education and special schools started. And the schools were set up in the early 50s with physios and OTs as base staff. So that was where I came into my thesis, and since then I have become more and more involved and promoting not just the role of the physio in special education, but the need for the physiotherapists who are working in special education to have good induction programs, because one of the things that my thesis identified was how different the role of a physiotherapist is working in education from working in any other health setting. And one of the things that they identified was the need for training in order to be able to prepare them for the job and to be able to work in that setting. And it's still an ongoing need. It's still something that is not done well. The schools don't prepare physiotherapists for the type of work we do. paediatrics, I think, it's all the same sort of thing, but I mean, special education is another step on from paediatrics, so that there is a lack of paediatric training and there's opportunities for development are few and far between, and it's very hard to plan your professional development when you don't know what's coming up. And as our employers ask us to sort of make suggestions about what we might be interested in developing and what courses might there be, but you can't do it because sometimes you don't know until a few months beforehand in the middle of a financial year that there's a course coming up or something like that, and there's not very much for education. So that's where I am at the moment in my profession, in that I love working in schools, to go into schools and to work alongside the kids in classrooms and to help teachers to understand that you have a child with a disability in your room, but this doesn't mean that they can't learn, that you can't include them, that the peers can't be involved in helping them. I'll give you an example. Yesterday I was at an IEP, which is an individual education planning meeting for a little boy that we work with. And at the start of this meeting, the teacher had done a montage of photographs of the things that he's done in this last term. And it was all the things that he'd been participating in. It showed him in the playground in his walking frame with his friends, in the wheelchair with the Freedom Wheel, which is a new gadget that you put on the front of a wheelchair that makes it into a 3-wheel device. It takes those little wheels out. Parents can take them on the beach. You can do bushwalking. They've done the rail trail. All these things. And we talked about how he's now learning to self-propel the chair himself. So one of my jobs now is to come back to work and develop. We've got individualised driver's licences that we work with the kids, so that when they're learning to propel their wheelchairs, we can help teach them the skills. But what we're doing for this particular little boy is, the teacher said, it's all very well him being able to push his chair. He said, but what about the others? And I said, oh, okay. And I thought he meant the adults in the room. And I said, oh, do you all need a wheelchair driving licence here as well? And they all laughed. But he said, we might do. He said, but I was actually thinking of his classmates. And so what I'm going to be doing is developing a program of disability awareness for the classmates, to know what they can do and how they can push the chair and how to talk to somebody who's in a wheelchair. And you don't talk to them when you're standing behind it when they can't see you, particularly for this little boy who has a hearing impairment as well. So there's a whole lot of things there. The other thing that came out at the meeting was how he's now moving from interacting mainly with adults to interacting with his peers, and how they're now working in groups, and he uses his standing frame as part of the class program when they're sitting on the floor, which is another part of his skill development thing. He has a classmate sitting on one side of him reading a book, while a classmate on the other side is signing to him because he's learning signing. And the classmate who's signing is learning it from the teacher aide who sits behind him, who's busy signing to him, so that he isn't even seeing an adult in part of this group. They're all working together for the child, and I just love that. I think that as long as we can get these kids involved in their communities and change the attitude of the other people around them, so that they're understanding what disability is about, and they're not people to be scared of, they're not people to be told. As I just heard this morning actually, a parent talking on the radio, he said he takes his son out and he hears parents say, don't stare at the kid in the wheelchair. And if you can make it so that parents don't have to say that, because the kids know that it's just somebody else in a wheelchair, they have a different way of getting around, that means that they're different, but they're no different from anybody else. And I think as a physiotherapist, what I can bring to the school and to that whole environment is this knowledge about movement that nobody else has. I mean, that teachers know about phys ed and that sort of stuff, but we bring with us a whole wealth of knowledge and information about how kids move, how they learn to move, how we can help them do that better, and so how we can help the families to make a difference for everybody.